Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Grand Salon. Welcome back. I hope that you've all had a lovely day out there in our first call in Bonnie, Scotland. Just so you know, in an hour's time, we've got team trivia, everybody. I know you're all desperate to get there. And then tonight, after dinner, we've got a brand new guest entertainer for you. His name is Dominic Ferris. He's an incredible musician. He's the musical director for Shirley Bassey. He is a Steinway ambassador. He's performed Abbey Road on many albums, and he's fantastic, and he's going to be here at 9:30. Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, back to Tales of Travel with our conversationalist, friend of Seaborn, Andrew Johnson, and his royal love affair with Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Johnson.
Thank you very much indeed, James. And I do encourage you to come to Dominic's show this evening. He is outstanding. So, what do we know? Rothesay. Rothesay is the seat of one of the senior members of the royal family, and it has been for many generations. Rothesay was the original seat of the Stuarts, originally spelt EW rather than U, and they were the royal or high stewards of Scotland, which is where their name comes from. And what do we know about King Charles III? Well, we know that he is passionate about the environment. We know that he has a great love of encouraging young people and has established a number of charities, particularly for that purpose. So great charitable causes. He loves the countryside, as his mother did, and the whole family value the times when they can be private. And nowhere is that more evident or more possible than in Scotland. So today I'm going to look at the royal houses of Scotland. And I mean that in two senses. The linear houses of the families and the properties in which they do or have lived. I can't touch everything. For example, I'm not going to be talking about Dumfries House, which is about 40 miles that way, that has never been a royal residence, but was purchased by Charles and given to a charitable foundation, partly to encourage young apprentices to develop their craft skills in renovating this place. And he has managed the most beautiful job with it. It's now open to the general public. It's owned by the Prince's Foundation. But it isn't a royal residence, so I'm not going to go any further into that. So looking at royal houses, well, okay, this is a shop, obviously. It's actually a shop in the terminal building for the Royal Yacht Britannia in Leith, Edinburgh, where we will be next Wednesday. And I'll come back to talk about that a little bit more. But this is not the sort of royal house that I'm talking about. I want to look at the historic connections of the royal family to the highlands and lowlands of this beautiful country. A sign. You know I like signs. I'm trying to work out why this guy might be so cheap, but he obviously thinks it's worth a go. So at this point, I need to ask, how many of you have Scottish heritage? I thought that might be the case. Okay. My name is Andrew Donald Johnson. 3 very Scottish names. I have some Scottish heritage, but in my case, it's really quite small. It's well below a quarter. So technically, I am a Sassenach. And as this definition tells us, Sassenach is actually a derogatory term for an Englishman or woman or a non-Gaelic speaking lowlander, or according to this, someone who understands the rules of cricket and mentions the World Cup win by England of 1966 at every opportunity that they get. This talk is about the royal houses of Scotland, and we'll look at some of the houses, meaning the lineage, and some of the residences. Now, my wife, Kathy, went to an English grammar school where the school houses were Tudor, Stuart, Hanover, and Windsor, three of the great royal houses in our in our history of monarchs. For those houses, Scotland remained a source of potential trouble, especially for the Tudor king, Henry VIII. For the whole of his reign, Scotland was a pain in his side. And the Stuarts had a checkered relationship with England. But from George IV of the Royal House of Hanover to the present day House of Windsor, Scotland has held a romantic attraction to the members of the royal family. But let's start by looking at some of the bricks and mortar properties. This is the Palace of Holyrood House, commonly referred to as Holyrood Palace. It's in Edinburgh. It's the king's official residence there. So when he visits to perhaps open the parliament or to entertain people, this is where he stays. It's situated at the end of Edinburgh's famous Royal Mile, with the Edinburgh Castle up at the other end. Mary, Queen of Scots, lived here between 1561 and 1567, and succeeding kings and queens have made this their principal official business residence in Scotland. Now, the king has an official Holyrood week, which runs at the end of June into July often. And during this time, the king and queen entertain guests at an annual garden party, which is a tradition that dates back to King George V and Queen Mary. If the standard is flying, they are in residence. This is Balmoral Castle, which is in Royal Deeside, Aberdeenshire, so up on the right-hand side. And it's been the Scottish home of the royal family since it was purchased for Queen Victoria by Prince Albert in the middle of the 19th century. Victoria loved it. She called Balmoral in her journals, "my dear paradise in the Highlands." And you can see the general location of it there. And just to remind you, we're just off Glasgow at the moment, and we'll be heading round the north. Now, Balmoral is a huge estate, over 10 miles long, and it's been valuable to generations of the royal family for the privacy that they're allowed to find there, away from those public duties. But I'm going to come back to both Balmoral and Victoria a bit later. This is Glamis Castle in Angus. Now, this is a bit further south, not far from Perth or Dundee, and it's been the family home of the Earls of Strathmore for over 600 years. Glamis was the childhood home of the late Queen Mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, whose parents were Lord and Lady Glamis. When she was 4 years old, her grandfather, who was the Earl at the time, passed away, and her father inherited the earldom and the castle. Barrowgill Castle was a semi-derelict place when in 1952 the estate was purchased by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, after she was widowed. She set about restoring the castle for use as a retreat, a vacation home. She took out some of the 19th century additions and reinstated some of the castle's original features and its original name, the Castle of May. She would spend August and often October there from 1955 through to her death in 2002. And King Charles inherited this from his grandmother, and he and Queen Camilla now visit quite regularly. Now, if you have afternoon tea up in the observation lounge, you will be used to those round baked pastries on which we put Cornish clotted cream and jam, but not in that order, of course. and you may call them scones or scones. This is a palace with the same spelling, but just to help the confusion along, it is known as Scone Palace. So don't call it Scone Palace and don't call it Scone Palace. It dates from at least the 9th century and was the crowning place of the kings of Scotland, home to the Stone of Scone, which is more commonly referred to as the Stone of Destiny. Kenneth MacAlpin, who was traditionally known as the first king of Scotland, Shakespeare's Macbeth, Robert the Bruce, Charles II are among the 38 kings of Scotland inaugurated and crowned at Scone, which is just north of Perth, so fairly central, little to the east. Not so far from Glamis Castle that I showed you just now. And Scone was also the site of the first Parliament of Scotland. Now, as I'm sure you know, Scotland and England have not always had the easiest, the most comfortable of relationships. And indeed, the Romans built the famous Hadrian's Wall from Tyneside, where we will be next week when we visit Newcastle, across to the Solway Firth on the west of the country. In fact, we dock in a place called Wallsend, and it's called Wallsend because that was the end of Hadrian's Wall, and you will be able to see some elements of that, I'm sure. It didn't work perfectly, but as far as the Romans were concerned, it managed to keep the Scots away, which was their main concern, and that was built in AD 122, so a little while ago. Then the Antonine Wall, the further north one, which runs from the Forth of Firth across to roughly where we are now, was a turf fortification on stone foundations. It was built by the Romans 20 years later across what's now the central belt of Scotland to, again, give them some form of defence. Now, in Braveheart, the 1995 American epic war film, directed by Mel Gibson, we have a frankly somewhat dubious view of history. It forms lots of stereotypes of the rocky relationship between high-handed English overlords and downtrodden Scots. Gibson stars as William Wallace, a late 13th century Scottish warrior who led the Scots in the First War of Scottish Independence. This was against King Edward I of England. I'm not going to go into the accuracy of the film because, frankly, if I did, or the politics of Scottish relations with England at the time, my time would be out before I'd finished that and you'd all miss trivia. But first, we have to understand a little bit of royal history. The royal houses of Scotland. So let's move back to where I started, to the Stuarts. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, reigned over Scotland from 1542 to 1567. During the time of Henry VIII's death, the reign of Edward VI, and the arrival of Elizabeth on the throne of England. Mary was the only surviving legitimate child of King James V, and she was just 6 days old when her father died and she acceded to the throne. She spent most of her childhood in France, while Scotland was ruled by regents on her behalf. And in 1558, she married Francis, the Dauphin of France. On his death, Mary returned to Scotland, and 4 years later, she married her first cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. But that was not a happy union. His residence was destroyed by an explosion, and Darnley was found murdered in the garden. James Hepburn, the 4th Earl of Bothwell, was generally believed to have orchestrated Darnley's death, but he was acquitted of the charge, and a month later, he married Mary. So, following an uprising against the couple, Mary was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle. On the 24th of July 1567, she was forced to abdicate in favour of James VI, her one-year-old son, by Darnley. And after an unsuccessful attempt to regain the throne, she fled southwards, seeking the protection of her first cousin once removed, Queen Elizabeth I of England. But Mary had once claimed Queen Elizabeth's throne as her own, so she wasn't actually arriving in very good conditions. She claimed and was held to be the legitimate sovereign of England by many English Catholics. Perceiving her as a threat, Elizabeth had her confined in various places over a period of 18 years. And Mary was then found guilty of plotting to assassinate Elizabeth, and she was beheaded in 1587. It's amazing what people can do to their cousins, really. But after the death of Elizabeth, she was the last of the House of Tudor. Mary's son James was the next legitimate heir, which led to the union of the crowns. And on the accession of James VI of Scotland to the thrones of England and Ireland as James I in 1603, the three realms were unified under a single monarch. But that union was a personal or a dynastic union, with the Crown of Scotland remaining both distinct and separate, despite James' best attempts to be known as the King of Great Britain. Charles I was born at Dunfermline Palace in 1600, the last king of an independent Scotland to be born in the country. When his father, James VI, had inherited the English throne, the family settled in London, and Charles didn't return north until 1633, when he arrived in Edinburgh for his Scottish coronation. It wasn't a happy visit. The Blessing, a royal ferry, capsized and sunk off the coast of Burntisland, and along with several members of the king's entourage, many priceless Stuart relics and coronation items were lost. Charles was distraught. He cut short his visit and his planned coronation tour, and he returned south to London. I am told that 19 Lancashire women were later rounded up, condemned as witches, and blamed for the sinking. Charles was later defeated by the Roundheads in the English Civil War, and eventually he surrendered to Scottish forces at the Saracen's Head Hotel, located 100 yards from where Kathy and I live in our 15th century home. Okay, this was not Scotland's last king, but a clever, suspenseful film about Idi Amin, played here by Forrest Whitaker, and the film is based on the events of Amin's rule. The title comes from a reporter in a press conference who wished to verify that Amin, who was known to adopt all sorts of fanciful titles for himself, had declared himself the King of Scotland. But we pass by that. And back to the real monarchy. England and Scotland would continue to be autonomous states sharing a monarch with Ireland until the Act of Union in 1707 during the reign of the Stuart monarch Queen Anne. And this made her the last monarch of the ancient kingdoms of Scotland and England, and the first monarch of Great Britain. Her uncle Charles II was the last monarch to be crowned in Scotland in Scone. After that, well, things deteriorated a bit. The Jacobite Rebellion of 1745, which resulted in the extinction of the original clan system with the defeat of the clansmen at the Battle of Culloden in 1746. Prince William, Duke of Cumberland, the the son of George II of Great Britain, had carried out policies that today could be regarded as ethnic cleansing. Cumberland authorised the wanton butchery by government troops and the wholesale transportation of clans who'd supported the Jacobite cause. After the 1745 Rising, the wearing of Highland dress and tartan, which was used as a sense of clan identity, was banned by the government as part of their campaign to quash any further threat of a Jacobite insurrection. Only the Highland regiments of the army were legally permitted to wear it. And the Dress Act of 1746 attempted to bring the warrior clans under government control by banning not only tartan, but other aspects of Gaelic culture. And it wasn't until 1782 that James Graham, the third Duke of Montrose, a spokesman for the Highland Society of London, succeeded in having the ban overturned. And the law was repealed, and it was no longer seen as ordinary Highland dress, but was adopted instead of as a symbolic national dress of Scotland. So how did we get from this to the joy of this? And if you were off the ship fairly early today, you will have seen the two little girls dancing a sword dance on the pier. And it was an absolute joy. So how did that change happen? Well, it was largely to the credit of this man, Sir Walter Scott. He is a Scottish historical novelist, playwright, poet, historian, and many of his works are classics of both English language literature and of Scottish literature. You probably have read Ivanhoe, Rob Roy, The Lady of the Lake, the romance Waverley. His works are full of Scottish romanticism, and he drew on many ancient legends and forgotten traditions. Primarily remembered for his extensive literary works and his political engagement, Scott was an advocate, judge, and legal administrator by profession. And he was the deputy sheriff of Selkirkshire. George IV, of the Royal House of Hanover, you may remember he was known for fashion and style. He was a bit of a peacock, to put it mildly. His friend, George Beau Brummel, was a leader of all things high fashion. And the visit of King George IV to Scotland in 1822 was the first visit of a reigning monarch in nearly 2 centuries. But it was Sir Walter Scott's organisation of the visit, with the inclusion of tartan pageantry, that was to have a lasting influence. It elevated the tartan kilt to become part of Scotland's national identity. This is David Wilkie's rather flattering portrait of the kilted King George IV. Lighting was chosen to tone down the brightness of his kilt, and the knees shown bare without the bright pink tights that he actually wore at the event. So, Scott didn't invent the kilt. He didn't invent the tartan, he didn't invent the clan, but he took what was there and he romanticised it. The origin of the kilt is still very controversial. There are early types of wrapped cloth garments and early bagpipes in North Africa and in parts of the Middle East. It's difficult to prove any link, but there are similarities. The Scottish kilt is traditionally a knee-length pleated garment worn by men in the Highlands, but the earliest kilts, known as belted plaid or great kilts, they evolved out of the cloaks that were worn over tunics. They were a single piece of cloth, pleated, gathered around the waist with a belt, and the top half was thrown over the shoulder as a cloak, which could also cover the head in inclement weather. Kilts, as we know them, are a pretty recent invention, probably dating back to about the 16th century. So for reference, Braveheart, the story of Wallace's uprising is set in the 13th century, 300 years earlier. So kilt experts point to the fact that Mel Gibson's costume was certainly not an accurate depiction. The phrase true Scotsman often refers to those men who wear nothing under their kilts. This is a bit of a myth in reality. The practice is certainly not the norm in Scotland, and it is extremely impractical to do so during the cold winter months, especially with the rough tweed that we won't go there. So until the middle of the 19th century, the Highland tartans were associated with either regions or districts rather than specific Scottish clans. And this was because, like other materials, tartan designs were produced by local weavers, designed for local tastes. They'd usually use the natural dyes that were available in that area. Today, any of us can go to one of the kilt shops in Edinburgh and find which clan they tell us our family is associated with, and buy kilts, bonnets, plaids, and a multitude of other items. A Scottish clan, the word actually comes from the Gaelic word for children, is a kinship group among Scottish people. Clans give people a sense of shared identity and descent. And traditionally, many clansmen, not actually related to the chief, took the chief's surname as their own to show solidarity, to obtain basic protection, or to obtain sustenance. But I digress. Back to the Royal Association with Scotland. The next characters in our story are Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. They first visited Scotland in 1842, 2 years after their marriage. And during their early visits, they stayed in very damp Perthshire, my apologies, which led Sir James Clark, the royal physician, to suggest that they should relocate their home to Deeside, now known as Royal Deeside. And in February 1848, Prince Albert acquired the lease on Balmoral, together with the furniture and the staff. Well, frankly, it was a bit of a mistake, because the house was quite dilapidated. It was too small for them and their entourage and their growing family, and certainly not suitable for hosting royal events. So a new house was completed in 1856, and the old castle was subsequently demolished. By autumn 1857, a new bridge was constructed across the River Dee, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, no less, and it linked Crathy and Balmoral. And the purchase of a Scottish estate by them and their adoption of a Scottish architectural style was very influential for the ongoing revival of Highland culture. They decorated Balmoral with tartans. They attended local events, including the Highland Games at Braemar, which the royal family have continued to support to this day. Combine that with the work of Sir Walter Scott, and this became a major factor in promoting the adoption of a Highland culture by lowland Scots. Following Albert's death, Victoria spent increasing periods at Balmoral. She stayed for as long as 4 months in 1 year, and during the early summer and during the autumn. It was during this period that Victoria began to depend on her servant, John Brown. He was a local gillie from Crathy, and he became one of her closest companions during her long mourning. Her children and ministers of state resented the high regard she had for Brown, and inevitably, stories circulated that there was something improper in their relationship. In fact, the Queen's daughters would joke that Mr. Brown was Mama's lover. Victoria herself dismissed the chatter as ill-natured gossip in the higher classes. Whatever the truth is, it made a great movie. And I'm sure you may have seen Billy Connolly and Judi Dench in the film Mrs. Brown. It's a delightful film illustrating the life Victoria led in the Highlands. As was the later film Victoria and Abdul, the story of her munshi, Abdul Karim, her Indian servant, who likened Balmoral to the mountains in Afghanistan and taught the Queen to write in Urdu. Unfortunately, many of her letters were destroyed by her family after her death, and poor Abdul was sent back to India to live in faded, reflected glory. But if you want to experience some of the magic, you can now stay in Karim's original cottage on the estate, which has been restored and converted into a vacation property. There were several memorials erected on the property. The pyramid cairn at the top of Craiglorchan was erected a year after Prince Albert's death, and the Queen had a statue erected of him on the event of the 28th anniversary of their engagement. But there is another statue, this one to John Brown, and this was moved from a position of prominence to a remote location on the estate when she no longer had the power to influence. Queen Victoria also instigated the role of the Queen's piper. The tradition of the piper has continued to this day, except for a period during war. His principal duty is to play every weekday at 9 a.m. for about 15 minutes under His Majesty's window when he's in residence in Balmoral, Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, or the Palace of Holyrood House. At Balmoral, he wears the Balmoral tartan, which is grey and red, conceived by Victoria and Albert in the middle of the 19th century. In the morning at the other royal residence, he wears the ancient hunting Stuart tartan, and in the evening, the royal Stuart. So the House of Windsor is the reigning royal house of the United Kingdom and a number of other Commonwealth realms. Edward VII and his son George V were members of the German ducal house of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. That's by dint of their descent from Albert, Prince Consort, husband of Queen Victoria, who was the last British monarch of the House of Hanover. The name was changed from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the English name Windsor in 1917 during the First World War because it was seen to be more sympathetic to the English cause at that time. Similarly, the Mountbatten family is a branch of the German princely Battenberg family, and the name Mountbatten was adopted during World War I by family members residing in the United Kingdom. So the British monarchy now uses their family name, the name Mountbatten Windsor, and that appears on wedding certificates and the like, for example, for Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, and Princess Royal, and so on. Now, on the 19th of May 2018, it was announced that the title of Earl Dumbarton was to be recreated in the Peerage of the United Kingdom by Queen Elizabeth II as a subsidiary title for her grandson Prince Harry on the occasion of his wedding. Prince Harry, now the Duke of Sussex, and his wife Meghan are known as the Earl and Countess of Dumbarton, respectively, in Scotland. Most of the senior royals, I say most because it doesn't apply to Anne, who is simply the Princess Royal, most of them have secondary titles. So, for example, his brother, Prince William, who is the heir to the throne, and his wife, Princess Catherine, hold various Scottish titles, but are generally referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay, where we are right now. He is also, of course, the Prince of Wales. He is, his senior English title is the Duke of Cornwall, and in Northern Ireland, he is the Baron Carrickfergus. So they each have different titles by which they will go depending on where they are. As you probably know, we Brits referred to Queen Elizabeth II as the Queen or Her Majesty. Her son and heir, King Charles, is the current head of the House of Windsor, and we tend to refer to him just as the King. Scotland played a very important role in the life of Queen Elizabeth. She regarded Buckingham Palace as her office, Windsor Castle as her home, and Balmoral as her retreat, which she would use when she needed to. And for a couple of months each summer, she would retreat to Scotland. But during that time, she read her boxes of papers every day. She would still talk to prime ministers every week. She'd never stopped working, but she enjoyed things like parlour games, Highland activities like hunting, shooting and fishing. And she was perfectly relaxed there and said to be a true countrywoman. She'd drive her Land Rover around the estate, and the locals in Ballater, where she would just go shopping on her own, were never fazed by her presence, and they would fiercely protect her from the press. Her affection for Balmoral really dates back to childhood, when she and her sister, Princess Margaret, had very happy holidays there before her father became king. It was here that the two young princesses were sheltered in the early days of the Second World War in 1939, when the King and Queen were in London. But no one could be sure how safe the world was then, and lots of young children were evacuated. My mother-in-law, for example, was one evacuated almost to the day that the two princesses were moved. So they spent their time taking lessons, as youngsters do, and playing with ponies, and they joined local knitting groups. They sent bonnets to the troops. But the highlight of their day was the 5 o'clock phone call from their mother and father, which they made as often as possible. But after 4 months, winter started to set in. Balmoral really isn't a suitable place for cold Scottish winters, and so they were relocated to the other family home in Norfolk, Sandringham. Balmoral was where Prince Philip proposed to the young Princess Elizabeth. She had been in love with him since they first met at Dartmouth Naval College, where he was a cadet, when she was just 13. He had quite a challenge to be accepted. He came from the Greek royal family, who were firstly seen to be very foreign, and secondly, to be supporters of Hitler and the Nazi regime. So she had to dig her heels in, and she did. She pushed and pushed until her father relented. There is a story that Philip didn't endear himself to the family on his first return to Balmoral, because as everyone else, he was expected to wear Highland dress, and he wasn't used to wearing a kilt. So as he approached the King and Queen, he curtsied, which did not go down particularly well. It fell rather flat. But Balmoral was the venue for a TV programme called The Royal Family, which was made in the early 1970s. Elizabeth wanted to be seen to be more open. She wanted the family to be understood. And so we saw them going walking, we saw them playing tennis, we saw Prince Philip barbecuing with Charles helping him. It was a very real look at the royal family. But she was seen to have given too much away. There was a belief that the royal family shouldn't have been seen to be that ordinary. And it hasn't been shown again since that first showing. Not every monarch had such an affinity for Scotland. King Edward VIII, a very short-lived monarch, wasn't a fan of hunting, shooting or fishing. He and divorcee Wallis Simpson had been conducting a scandalous affair before his father died in 1936. He didn't want to be king. They were party animals. They wanted the city life. He skipped a couple of pre-arranged formal duties and invited his brother, the then Duke of York, and his wife, Elizabeth, who was to become the Queen Mother. He invited them to dinner, and the Duchess of York was scandalised that the king should behave in this way. And she apparently ignored Wallis all evening. And that snub was to start a lifelong refusal to accept her, and the conviction that Edward's abdication and her husband's unexpected, unplanned inheritance of the crown, with all the accompanying wartime stress, eventually led to his early death in 1952. During her long reign, the Queen Elizabeth, received 15 prime ministers at Balmoral, some of whom were anything but comfortable there. The first prime minister to visit on her accession was Churchill, by now an elder statesman, but determined to pass on to the young Queen the valuable support he had given her father. She became very fond of him and eventually paid him the great honour of visiting 10 Downing Street as his personal guest on his retirement from office. Now, Mrs. Thatcher didn't find it quite as easy. Margaret Thatcher was an upright, businesslike woman. She wore power suits. She carried her handbag. She didn't sit still for very long. In fact, the Queen is reported to have said to someone, "Can this woman never sit down?" It's not known whether the royal family played their favourite prank on her, which was to bring out a chair that had not been sat on since Queen Victoria died, waiting to see if their guest would go to sit in it. Because the way they played it, as the visitor's backside was being lowered into the chair, everyone would shout, "You can't sit there! That's Queen Victoria's chair!" But someone else who disliked Balmoral was Diana, Princess of Wales. After spending the early days of their courtship there, she wasn't at all interested in country pursuits and was known to complain very loudly about the midges, poor thing. On the other hand, King Charles is an old hand at Scottish life. He was sent to school at Gordonston, the school Prince Philip attended, which has indeed a very extreme regime of cold showers and physical activities. He was a more sensitive soul than his father, and he wasn't very happy there and used to take refuge at nearby Birkhall, the home of the Queen Mother, which he inherited from her on her death in 2002. He also spent his second honeymoon there in 2005 with Camilla. So Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, a lover of Scotland, an absolutely avid lover of Scotland. And when her husband died, she adopted the title Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, to avoid confusion with her daughter. Now, while in Scotland, the royals immersed themselves in the local community. Crathy Church, just over that bridge I mentioned earlier on, small church of Scotland, parish church in the Scottish village of Crathy. And on Christmas Day and at other times, we will, sorry, not on Christmas Day, in the summer, we will see the family arriving at Crathy Church for Sunday services. And it was also the presence of Harry and Meghan at a family visit here that originally raised press speculation about their engagement to fever pitch. One of the things that happens every year at Balmoral is the annual Gillies Ball for the staff of the Balmoral estate. It's a tradition going right back to Victoria, and the royals and their staff mingle and dance together and have a high time. Highland Games, I mentioned earlier on, are also a royal tradition. It is normal for the royals to be in Scotland for the local Highland Games, where bagpipes are played, the kilt is worn, heavy heaving events are played, especially the caber toss and thank you very much, the tug of war. So centred on competitions and piping and drumming and dancing and Scottish heavy athletics. The games also include entertainment and exhibits related to other aspects of Scottish life. The royal family grant royal warrants to businesses approved for them who have supplied them and continue to supply them with goods or services. Now, our current king has reduced the number of businesses that are entitled to warrants, and also he has reduced the number of his family who can issue them. So principally, he, his wife, and the Prince of Wales are the main issuers of royal warrants. But it enables a supplier to carry this crest on their products and premises and to advertise the fact that they supply to the royal family. And finally, not a house at all, but very much a royal sanctuary, a deeply loved royal sanctuary, was the Royal Yacht Britannia. It's one of the world's most famous ships, launched at John Brown's shipyard just across there in Clydebank in 1953, and it served the late Queen for 44 years. The Britannia carried out 968 voyages for the Queen and the royal family on missions, largely missions supporting British trade internationally. It was taken out of service in 1997, and it's thought to be one of the few occasions when the Queen was publicly seen to shed a tear. So it's now at the pier in Leith, just alongside where our tenders land when we are there on the 11th of June. And I think a number of you are already booked to see it. Those of you who aren't already but have no other plans, it really is well worth a visit, and you can get a real feel for how royal life was. So I have one more talk, which will be the day before that on the 10th, because Kathy and I are leaving you in Edinburgh. But I'm going to talk about the City of London. I'm a liveryman of the City of London, and I know that there are some of my fellow liverymen on the ship who we've met already. I will explain to you what that means. I will explain to you some of the history of the city, this tiny piece of London, which is where the major financial and insurance transactions of the world take place. And I will tell you something about the ceremony and the processes and the procedures. For now, I need to let you go to trivia, if that's what you're going to do. Kathy and I are still around, and we'll be around all evening and from here on in. But for now, thank you very much. A question?